Travis Kinney with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I'm talking about National Working Group, Bridge Deck Chloride Testing.
Okay, so we're talking about the Bridge Deck Chloride Testing Working Group. It is a national working group. It came from the West. So this came from one of our monthly phone calls where we were discussing bridge deck chloride testing, and it became apparent that everybody did it differently and nobody really knew why. And so it was kind of a problem or an issue that came forward that we said, well, maybe we can form a group to answer that question for us, right? I personally am not an expert in this field, even though I'm chairing the group, and I don't have time either. And so if you can kind of pull together a group of experts to do the work for you, wow, that is another benefit of the partnership for sure. And so that's exactly what we did here. So the scope of work, what are we accomplishing with this group is we're developing a guide on bridge deck chloride sampling and develop specifications and contract templates that go with it. And so this is kind of and I'll run through what the guide is, but the idea is to try and develop some consistency on a national scale for something that we're all doing, just doing differently. Kind of run through some of the group members. We have a good owner participation. We did kind of start-ish from the West, and so there's definitely a little shift towards a more Western participation, but we are represented by most of the partnerships, which gives us a national perspective. Industry, we have a lot of the national experts, literally the national experts are participating in this working group and volunteering their time to do so, and it's really amazing to kind of see how this goes. I participated in quite a few working groups. Some of them you're really trying to push and pull to kind of get through and process stuff. Literally every call, even when I did not have much of a robust agenda, I've had to shut down at an hour to respect everyone's time because you start getting all these people together and they get really excited and enthusiastic about the topic, which is a fantastic problem to have. A lot of these people. So I know there's some of these people in the room. I guess if you're participating in this working group, you maybe just give me a raise of your hands. Yes? Thank you to everyone that is participating. You guys are awesome. I'm just going to kind of run through a little bit of the chapters that we're doing, right? The end deliverable of this is going to be a report, and we're actually close to getting there. The first chapter is an overview of chloride deterioration and a discussion on preservation versus rehabilitation. It became fairly obvious that a lot of us see a bridge deck that looks like this, and we go out and run chloride sampling on it, right? We already know the answer to that question. There is a problem with that deck. You need to do major rehab, right? The issue is that not many of us are actually doing investigation on the decks when they're not requiring heavy maintenance, right? That's that preservation piece that we really want to start shifting the attention to. You should be sampling your decks that are in good shape, so you know how to have a good management program to avoid having your decks look like that one. And I still have this deck in service, working on getting that bridge replaced. So chapter 2 is going after a network level chloride sampling, right? We can't sample every bridge deck, so how do you pick the ones to sample? And so there's definitely condition-based sampling criteria, right? If your deck looks awful, maybe you should run some sampling on it, but hopefully not. That's going to be your driving force. Environmental factors, maintenance and project history, right? We're covering these things in the report. Important-based sampling. If you can't get out and do work on a bridge deck, to do one of those major rehabs, if it triggers you to build a detour bridge like Dwayne mentioned to do deck work, well, you probably want to sample that deck, right? You're not going to be able to rehabilitate it, so you better preserve it. Make sure you know where you're at on it. Program management, kind of talking about how to manage some of the sampling data. So it's chapter 2, network level. So then chapter 3 is getting down to the project level, right? So there was an issue with not having a good sampling methodology, why you were going to sample. And then there was also some issues in how you actually obtain the samples. We noticed there was just a wide scatter in what people were doing. We're not necessarily saying you have to conform to a particular sampling method, but kind of saying that there's definitely pros and cons attached to a lot of different ways, right? A lot of folks had a lot of background in doing these powder samples, and there's a lot of pros and cons that go with that. Here's doing the core samplings. That seems to be kind of more where we're heading to, but kind of providing that project level sampling guidance. So I've identified which bridges I'm going to sample. Now this is the piece to go ahead and do that sampling. Am I doing it in the wheel pass? How many samples am I taking? All these kind of things are going to be discussed in this project level sampling. It'll also get into the chloride testing procedures, right? There's a bunch of different procedures. I won't pretend to know all the different numbers and standards. I kind of jot them down every now and then on the phone calls when everyone gets excited if you're using this one versus that one, but it'll be included in the report. kind of talking about some of the other factors that influence these sample reports that come out. So chapter 4, you found the bridge, you sampled the bridge, you got results from it. Now what do you do with it, right? And so we're going to have we have a chapter on modeling these test results, how to process the data from chloride testing to obtain diffusion coefficients, and looking at service life prediction. I would mention that we're not going to get heavy into service life analysis because that is a whole nother section of this. One thing we kind of found throughout this process is that there was a whole lot of tangents that we could have gone into that would have really expanded the scope of this report. And we might still get there eventually, but we only started after the national meeting last year, and we're almost to the point of having an actual finished product. And so we really wanted to get to that piece to answer that first question: why are we sampling and how are we sampling? And then kind of moving on there with other stuff. So the pieces on service life prediction and then programming future work are going to be kind of generic. Are you still looking at preservation versus rehabilitation? Those kind of things would be discussed. It's not going to tell you, well, you need to mill off exactly 1.3 inches and then put back a microsilica overlay. It's not going to get to those specifics. There'll be a couple appendixes on the report. This was some stuff that came up during our discussions of it that we felt had real value to the owners. I should mention that this report is really written for the owners. This is going to be for the people like myself that manage programs but don't necessarily have an expertise in how to actually implement it. Those folks that are already national experts on how to do chloride sampling don't need another report to show them how to do it. It's really written for those owners in mind, those that want to start a sampling program but don't know where to go from there. Appendix A, example projects. We're going to have a handful of projects that actually show you what someone did on that and the results from that analysis. And then Appendix B is going to be contracts and specifications to kind of show an example of if some states do this with in-house forces and some consult it out. We want to provide the information in there for how to actually put it into a contract. Obviously, each state contracts this a little bit differently, but at least have an example to build from. So as I alluded to, we're like 95% complete with the draft report. It's like almost 60 pages in length. Again, done all under a volunteer basis. We're starting our review process. We're hoping to complete that in middle of June, so that we have an internal document that we can then share with the 4 regional partnerships. Remember, we want this to be a national report and sponsored by TSP2. So we want to give even though it's a national working group, we want to still send it out and give time for the various partnerships to maybe include it in one of their monthly phone calls and kind of do a review and discussion if they have any concerns. We intend to publish it through TSP2, at least through our website, and then also coordinate with MAC for distribution through AASHTO. We talked about TC3, right? The intent is going to get the report into the hands, as many hands as possible. So we're not really trying to narrow down the scope of who can get access to it. We're trying to make it available through whatever resources we have. So future work, adding in the contract and specifications piece is kind of one of our 5% we're still working on. We did have a lot of different factors that could affect deck deterioration that came up throughout our discussions. We were very specific. We're looking at decks and chlorides for this report. If we want to start looking at sulfates and other things, carbonation, other factors that could be influencing your deck condition, that could be a spin-off into a new working group, but again, trying to focus on getting something in people's hands. Service life and future project recommendations. That was a huge piece that could have expanded and kind of, not bogged it down, but expanded the scope of this report to something that would have been years in the making. And so it still would be something worth doing. Just kind of get through there from there. We've been using Google Docs to collaborate on this report. I don't know if any of you have used that before, but we found that was very successful. Just about everyone that had access, or we had a couple DOTs that were blocking Google Docs so they couldn't get access to it. But other than that, I mean, it's a great online collaboration tool. Everyone can be working off the same report at the same time. It doesn't require me to compile things throughout and then kind of make their edits throughout it, and then doing the same thing for our QC checklist. So that's where we're at on it. We're getting really close. I'm excited to kind of share it with you guys. Thanks.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.